Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Workforce, Labor, Economic Development Policy and Finance Committee. We are honored today to have a lot of good testifiers to talk about what some of the changes in laws have done over the last couple of years. So we're excited to hear from some major employers in our communities that'll be here today. Before we get started, I do want to make sure that we approve the minutes. Representative Mueller, I'm going to ask for approving the minutes of both January 16th and the first motion, and then we'll do the second minutes after that. We want to make sure we get our ducks in order to get our minutes approved. So, Representative, do you move the January 16th minutes as presented?
Mr. Chair, I would ask that we would move to accept and adopt the January 16th minutes.
Any questions, members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Representative Mueller, also in front of us is January 21st minutes. Want to make sure that those are in front of members for any questions, comments, and looking for your motion.
Mr. Chair, I would also move that we would adopt the January 21st minutes as well.
Members, any questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you for that. Minutes are approved for the 16th and the 21st of January. Members, today we brought the theme of today is, again, listening to major employers in all of our communities that hire, that educate our children, and some of the effects that have been put in place. Some have been put in place already, some are coming. And we want to make sure that we hear from leaders in the school districts around the state, and we've got a number of them here today, both larger and smaller. We'll have one on Zoom call as well today. So members and folks in the audience, thank you for coming in this morning. I'll call up the folks that'll be starting to testify and sort of just your impacts of the Earn Sick and Save time, looking at the paid family medical leave that is being proposed. We'd like to hear your thoughts on this, whether you have some thoughts of maybe support, maybe some thoughts of concerns and what this might do with some, what we've heard is a lot of unfunded mandates here. First on our list is Ms. Kim Lewis. If you could come forward, Ms. Lewis. And then on deck would be Dr. Anne Marie Foucault. Did I say that right? And if you want to come up too, you can sit in the seat next to it. So we'll kind of keep everybody coming in line. And then our third testifier will be Ms. Evenson on Zoom. So that'll be our third testifier today. So Ms. Lewis, welcome to the committee. If you could, you know the routine. We'll introduce yourself. And start your testimony. Thanks for getting up so early with us this morning.
Good morning, Chair Baker and committee members, and thank you for having us. My name is Kimberly Lewis, and I represent the Minnesota School Boards Association, which is comprised of 331 school districts across Minnesota. Today, I'm also speaking on behalf of the Minnesota Association of School Administrators and the Association of Metropolitan School Districts. I point that out because together our organizations are responsible for the governance and the administration of all the school districts in Minnesota. School districts are one of Minnesota's local units of government, along with cities, counties, and townships, and I'm really pleased that you invited me and many of my colleagues here today to share the unique impact of Earned Safe and Sick Time and paid leave. I'd like to start with Earned Safe and Sick Time, or what is now commonly referred to as ESST. To give you the full picture, I need to briefly go back to 2023. ESST was a bill that we looked at, discussed, and determined that we more than met the terms of that bill with our locally negotiated benefits that include sick time. Honestly, we weren't thrilled with some of the expanded uses that the bill contained, but again, we knew that the time off that we offered was more than the 1 hour for every 30 hours worked, and we understood the reason for the implementation of the bill in some areas, but we appreciated that it was capped too. So we looked at it and we said, our employees, some have accrued hundreds of hours of sick time. This is not something that we need to weigh in on so heavily, and we didn't oppose the bill. When the bill became law, our organization and many others held webinars. We explained the impact of the new law to our members, and at that time we encouraged our school districts to separate ESST from the traditional sick time. So the districts created 3 buckets. They had vacation, sick time, and ESST if they didn't have their strict PTO. This was logical and necessary to manage the new ESST rules, if you will, which does not require notification or documentation for time off. Fast forward to last year in the 2024 session, a bill was introduced to kind of fix some of the things that were in the new ESST law. We were paying very close attention to it. The bill did many things, but most of all, and most concerning to us, it took all of the individuals' existing sick leave that had been previously negotiated and signed as a legal contract by our employee groups in the district, and made that ESST. So all of the uses of ESST were now available for those hundreds of hours that employees had with no documentation requirements or no notification requirements. It's a problem for our school districts. A majority of the school districts have previously negotiated in good faith with employees and have reached agreements with where employees are eligible to leave to cover for personal illness and injury, and that amount exceeded all the leave amounts required in the ESST statute. Many school districts have allowed employees to accumulate large banks of sick leave. In fact, we have a couple that have over 43,000 days. Another district has 32,000 days at a monetary value of over $12 million.
Ms. Lewis, I'm sorry to interrupt. 43,000 days or 43,000 hours?
43,000 days. So if you take the totality of the sick
school
days-
district.
The school district.
Thank you. Okay, I just want to make that clear. Thank you. I'm sorry,
Certainly,
proceed.
no. And that's excluding the cost of substitutes. As you know, we're required to have a highly qualified teacher or paraprofessional in front of our children, and it doesn't include the learning loss that some of those extrapolated days can cover. So the impact to the districts are reassigning or converting use from sick time or the personal illness and injury that's defined in statute to ESST, and that overrides the previously signed legal employer-employee agreements, and quite honestly raises the argument that this might be a violation of the contract clause of the U.S. and state constitutions. Employees with 10, 20, 30 years of service, which is very common in local units of government, have accrued sick time that was bargained in good faith and agreed to again, and those hours have accumulated to hundreds. Some examples of other things that the school districts have on the books is a custodian in one district for 6 years has over 600 hours accumulated, or 80 days. Another district has an average of 310 hours per employee, and the highest bank in that for an employee is 3,400 hours for one person. Another district in their nutrition staff of 37, the senior nutrition staff have over 20,000 hours banked. 4 of them could take an entire year of school off. In talking with the districts, they've seen a substantial increase even from when the law was instituted last January 1st, probably a 50% increase in sick leave requests in the first few months of last year. I want to chat and say that we've had many meetings with the bill authors last year trying to explain this. We had hoped to have the bill heard in education so as to bring to light in our education finance committees the impact of both the financial and human capital, and we did not have that opportunity. We understand that you've previously heard from some of our other local government partners, and collectively we have met. We continue to try and bring forth some concerns and some ideas of compromise, if you will. One of the things that we hope that the committees might consider as we move forward with possible solutions is proration. That is an issue for many of our districts. So if we hire someone in the middle of the year, we can't prorate the ESST that's provided to that employee or a part-time employee. So that is an option that we would like to have added to the number of options that are already in existence. We would also like to recommend that coaches, short-term substitutes, and other employees that have stipends not be eligible for ESST. If we have a teacher that puts in for a sub and the sub claims that spot and then claims ESST, our districts are spinning trying to find someone to come in. So they accept the short-term call sub as their job, and they know that they can pick it up or not pick it up. But for them to pick it up and then call in sick is a problem for our districts. As to paid leave, we did testify in many committees that the districts would have significant financial concerns. We understand that there's a benefit to providing time off and for the reasons outlined in law. However, that bill just presents some unique, difficult hardships for our school districts. We are already experiencing staffing shortages and difficulty finding substitutes. And if we have up to 20 weeks, that's problematic. Our students need and deserve to have consistent, high-quality staffing in the schools. And the serious budget implications, and you'll hear from my colleagues, probably in specific, but in terms of a new payroll tax at that, and we're responsible for at least 50% of that, that translates to millions of dollars in districts where no funding was provided to districts. Many are making cuts, and they're wondering how they can do this. In some districts, it's 4, 5, 10 teachers that could be in front of our kids, and that cost is significant. I do appreciate the committee's time and your attention and your willingness to listen to us, and I'm happy to stand for any questions now or at the end of the presentations.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. And I think what we'll do, members, is, again, even with this, we've got a load of them here, but I think if there's a question or two for directly Ms. Lewis, we can go ahead and do that. Otherwise, we'll know you'll be able to come back if we have questions at the end. Because I think what we're going to experience today is just the reality of what these financial impacts are having, number one, and with the kind of the duplication and stacking of many benefits that have been worked hard for by the employees in the school district. So I think we're seeing a lot more clarity today than we did, or than legislators that passed this without having proper hearings. So again, that's what our job is today, to make sure that those voices are heard. I am extremely concerned that I'm hearing these exact things around the state. So you did a great job summarizing it in a larger scale, Ms. Lewis, so thank you very much. Members, any questions for Ms. Lewis? Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ms. Lewis. Listening to your testimony here, the question that I'm left with is, are our school employees able to carry forward all of their earned sick and safe time hours year over year, or does that have to be paid out on an annual basis to them if it's unused?
Ms. Lewis.
Representative Schultz, committee members, as I'm understanding your question, so if an employee has 200 hours, at the end of December, they carry those forward. Most of the contracts will allow that unless it's stipulated in a contract to otherwise, but I would say 90%, 99% of them do carry that forward. And that's why they've been able to accumulate those hours over the years to that degree. Some school districts will cap it at 184 hours, 200 hours. For different groups, they have different caps. But again, that's locally negotiated. So those folks have the opportunity to sit across from administrators. Administrators have an opportunity to hear from staff, and they agree on what those things are. So they're all locally negotiated. And that's why we appreciate the fact that those contracts have been discussed with local folks, and they have those agreements rather than have someone from outside of their district make those decisions for them.
Representative Schultz. Thank you. Further questions? Representative Bakeberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Lewis, for coming in and speaking with us today. My question is, you talked about cuts, and do you have a sense of the number of districts across Minnesota that are going to be cutting budgets this year?
Ms. Lewis.
Representative Bakeberg and committee members, we've heard anecdotally, and we just did a survey, MSBA just did a survey, and I'm waiting for the results to come back from that. I would say more than not. There are folks in the room that I think you'll be able to hear from independently. But I know, for instance, the largest school district in the state, in Okehennepin, has been very vocal about the cuts that they're having to make. And recently speaking with their superintendent, paid leave would cost them $2.5 million as an estimate. And that's at the current levels that they're at. We know that as this is going to start in 26, that number could very easily increase. But it's significant, and there are folks in the room, too, that could speak to a little bit more of their individual members, but we have heard our districts are suffering. They are making cuts, and they're trying to keep that out of the classroom, and it just gets to a point where there's no more staff to cut. We had a representative here from Forest Lake yesterday that said that they are just down to the bare bones in administration, and if, for instance, some of the other benefits, they're having to really cut back on their teachers, and in their case, it was 4 teachers just to pay for the benefits that are here.
Representative Bakeberg, any follow-up? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Lewis, thank you so much for this testimony, and again, I know you'll be around if we need to have you come back, so thank you. Dr. Anne Marie Fulcalt, did I get it pretty close?
Yes,
Thank you.
very
All
close,
right,
thank
and then
you.
again, we've got Ms. Evenson on deck on Zoom, and then if Dr. Jeremy Schmidt wants to come forward at the testimony table, that'd be fine too. Get yourself comfortable, and you can sit at your spot there too, so that'd be fine. So welcome, Doctor, and please introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
Good morning, Chair Baker and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. My name is Anne Marie Fuqua, and I'm superintendent of the St. Michael Albertville School District. As a superintendent with over 9 years of experience in this position, I have often found that it's these unintended costs and consequences of legislation, such as mandated benefit programs like earned sick and safe time and paid leave, that are often overlooked when measuring the effect of such new programs on public school districts. At STMA, we anticipate an increase of $400,000 in fiscal 2026 to cover additional substitute and payroll costs stemming from the new ESST law and paid leave law. However, the more challenging aspects that are more difficult to measure are the indirect impacts on students and our school community. Public schools operate with a unique youth workforce structure where nearly 95% of our staff are represented by collective bargaining agreements. When staff members are absent, we rely on substitutes to ensure both student safety and the continuity of learning. One significant impact is the overall increase in absenteeism. Before these new laws, school employees received generous benefit amounts that exceeded the requirements of the current ESST law. School districts, including STMA, negotiated agreements that allowed verification of absences and follow-up in rare cases of misuse, ensuring that leave was used as intended. Under the new law, sick leave can now be used for expanded purposes, and verification cannot be requested until after 3 consecutive workdays, reducing oversight. Additionally, the operational impacts of administering these programs is substantial. The cost of implementing and tracking ESST time demands significant administrative resources that could otherwise be allocated to other priorities. Public schools often employ a mix of permanent and temporary staff, including those who only work a few days, weeks, or months, such as coaches and substitute teachers. Now the district must track leave for all temporary and seasonal staff and extend ESST time to employees covering for others on leave. In effect, this means we now require substitutes for our substitutes. Finally, schools are operating in an unprecedented labor environment with fewer high-quality substitutes available to fill resources. Substitute costs are now taking up a larger portion of our school district's operating budget. As we move forward, we would be grateful for the legislature to focus on flexibility for school districts. This would permit us to honor the sick leave provisions many staff have already earned through collective bargaining agreements and would allow school districts to operate more effectively. At the same time, we can ensure the statutory minimum sick time is available to all permanent staff not covered by such agreements. This balanced approach would allow school districts to meet the policy objectives of the legislation without imposing unnecessary financial and administrative burdens, enabling us to focus more fully on serving our students and communities. As for the paid leave law, the direct and indirect consequences have a substantial impact on operations and ultimately students. In assuming the employer portion will be set at 0.44%, my school district, which spends over $48 million on salaries, will face an additional direct payroll cost exceeding $211,000. For a lean school district like STMA, with no significant local sources of revenue or an operating levy, this translates to fewer teachers and staff available for our students. These figures, however, do not account for the indirect costs such as salaries and benefits for substitute teachers and other replacement staff. Our district already offers generous paid leave under collective bargaining agreements, and these terms will remain in place after the implementation of paid leave. Consequently, teachers and staff will have an extended period during which they can take leave and still be paid. This will likely lead to longer absences among teachers and staff at a time when identifying qualified and licensed substitute is already a significant challenge. While this law has not been implemented yet, and the actual costs and effects on school districts remain uncertain, the potential negative impact on student learning is clear. We would be grateful if legislators offered flexibility to provide a minimum support floor while carving out statutory exceptions for school districts that already offer comparable paid leave benefits. This approach would mitigate the impact on students while upholding the law's intent. In closing, I respectfully ask for your thoughtful consideration of the impacts of ESST and paid leave on public schools. While these programs are well-intentioned, their unintended costs and consequences have not been fully accounted for in evaluating their effects on our schools. Thank you for listening and for your continued support on public education and Minnesota students. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Foucault. Just a question. Will the mandates that you have experienced and the ones coming, will they hurt our students, in your opinion?
In my opinion, yes. We've undergone significant cuts. We cut $7.3 million a couple years ago and 77 staff, and we're having to divert resources to our district office, which we do not like. We like to put money in the classroom for our kids, and we're having to divert those dollars to district office staff to take care of these underfunded mandates. So yes.
Thank you. I just know that the last couple of years, the legislature passed record spending, $2.2 billion for our schools. And you're telling me that I'm hearing cuts all over the state of Minnesota. So this is one of the largest drivers of that, those two programs that you mentioned this morning. Is that what you're kind of telling us this morning?
Yes, Chair Baker.
Thank you. All right. Any further questions, members? Representative Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I just have some, not being in the education field, so I just have some quick questions regarding how substitute teachers work, as far as how do they accumulate so much ESST when it's usually, I'm an employer, so I know we accumulate so much time based on how many hours you work. So when a substitute teacher comes in, are they employed by you at that point? Do they have a central employment, or how do they accumulate so much time to be able to say, example, come in and all of a sudden say, I'm taking the day off?
To the testifier.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Johnson, members of the committee. That's a good point. So up until this year, we did not have to give our substitute staff members, either certified staff or support staff, sick time, but now we do. So we had to implement a system so when they do work for us, not for other districts, so they're not under contract with us, but when they do work for us, they do get sick time. And so when they call in sick, we have to get a substitute for the substitute.
Representative Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But I guess it goes back to, I think, accumulates to about, was it 80 hours a year? But it accumulates at a certain percentage for each day. So an example, when I hire somebody, I have it set up that they don't get 80 hours day one. How does that work for, in your situation? So are they keeping that employed, basically going from classroom to classroom to classroom, that essentially they are full-time employees, that they accumulate that much time off so quickly that this is a situation?
Testifier, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Johnson. Yes, so they don't get as much as our certified or permanent staff member. They do get a certain percentage allocated based on how much they work.
Representative Johnson, anything following up?
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Mecklin? No, sorry, Representative Mueller.
Sorry, Representative, sorry, Chair.
That's how
and
the
Vice
over
Chair,
here.
apparently you had a question. Representative Johnson, and thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being here, Doctor. I've been to your school lots of times, and I love going there. This is something that, with substitute teachers, as Dr. Full, oh my gosh, I always forget because I call you by your other names, sorry. This is not something that we've had to do as an education system before. Like, substitutes were simply coming in at an hourly basis. They were hired that morning or like in advance, hey, I'm gonna be gone in 2 weeks and I wanna hire a substitute teacher. I used to be the person that had to find substitutes for my school district. And so one of the best perks of being a substitute teacher is that you got to say, no, sorry, I have a kid's birthday or I have things going on and I'm sorry I can't sub that day. And because you had that flexibility to say no, you also then didn't be offered all of the extra benefits that a permanent employee would have. And so now being forced to offer some of these extra benefits, when a sub is there, a sub could be there for just one classroom. I've had that happen before, or they could be there the whole day. And so it really does add extra burdens to our schools to have to keep track of how many hours have they taught, how many days did they teach, and how many hours in that day did they stay in the school district. Because once I get a sub license, I can go anywhere in our area. Like if I get my sub license, I can substitute teach down in southern Minnesota and in any of the school districts that you're seeing. I can sign up to be a sub there, but they have to track those hours for me for that district while I go anywhere. So this is an extremely burdensome thing for our school districts, knowing what a substitute teacher was designed to be. It was designed to be flexible, it was designed to be an emergency, and it was designed to be something where you could say, yep, I'm gonna fill in for here, or no, I can't. And because you had that flexibility to say yes or no, you didn't have all the extra perks that were offered to permanent and contracted employees that had collective bargaining benefits.
Representative Mueller, that's very helpful. Thank you. I don't think there was a question in there, but it did help me understand that better too. So, Dr. Foucault, thank you very much for your testimony today, and I know you'll be around for further questions if we need that, okay? Thank you. Next up, members, we have Ms. Evenson, who is joining us by Zoom call today. So hopefully you can hear us okay, Ms. Evenson, and if you can, go ahead and introduce yourself, and please proceed with your testimony.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, good morning, Chair Johnson and committee members. My name is Renee K. Stevenson, and I am the superintendent for Jordan Public Schools. I want to start by sharing my great appreciation for the reflectiveness of this committee and seeking feedback on recent legislation for school districts. As an educational leader, I recognize that we can have the most positive intent, and sometimes the impact falls short of that intention. So I'm here to testify and share the impacts of recent legislation on our districts and educators. Jordan Public Schools serves approximately 1,800 students. We are one of the few districts that does not have a local operating levy. We rank 301 out of 328 districts in revenue rankings. And despite that, we have prioritized and maintained a balanced budget, making reductions as needed. We are fiscally responsible and extremely intentional with the use of our community tax dollars, which means we run very lean operations and staffing. All of this considered, our district, like many others, already sees budget shortfalls from legislation that is having an unintended impact. One of the most challenging pieces of legislation that impacts school budgets and operations directly is the Earned Safe and Sick Time, or ESST. Up front, our district incurred legal fees in development of the required MOU with bargaining units. School districts already have supportive leave options in place for staff. The added layer of ESST has greatly increased the need for substitutes, which adds to the increased costs of the budget in the event we can even fill the open substitute position. The expanded availability of ESST to employees that did not previously have paid time off, like our part-time kids company workers, community education front desk workers who are often students and often working only a few hours a week, and then also any substitute employees. This is a challenge as they are now able to accrue paid time off, and it adds another accounting impact and additional time for our one HR staff member, as well as for the program administrator on top of the time that was already added for operationalizing other new legislation. The broad scope of allowable uses has additionally resulted in more absences, more unfilled sub-positions, and greatly impacts our students and school district operations. I would request consideration that pre-K through 12 school districts be exempt from this legislation, as we already have supportive locally negotiated leave options available to our employees. I would also like to note, though we are not yet at the stage of implementation, I would like to call your attention to concerns regarding the impact of paid family medical leave to school districts. As you are likely aware, and I've mentioned already, school districts already have supportive leave options in place for our staff. In simple financial terms, based on 2024 wages paid, Jordan's portion would be $69,000 if we are able to negotiate a 50% shared agreement with our groups. Additionally, this added layer brings both concerns and many unknowns, including the immediate tax impact to employees, unfunded costs to employers, impact, as I mentioned, to our locally negotiated contracts, impact to central office, knowing we do not have the budget to mitigate the added accounting responsibilities by adding staff. In the past 3 years alone, we have seen an increase of over 800 new budget codes. We also worry about the shortage of licensed subs available and the unintended impact to students and school operations with the potential of 20-week leaves. We would request more specificity in the legislation and full funding for schools to implement the paid family medical leave. And whether we're calling the new legislation educational mandates or educational opportunities, they have the same impact, especially to a district like Jordan that does not have a local operating levy. We would request long-term funding mechanisms in place for this new legislation or repeal as needed. Additionally, I would ask that we please trust board officials to govern and partner with school administration to prioritize budgets and make educational decisions based on the needs of students, staff, and community. Thank you so much for your time and reflection.
Thank you, Ms. Stevenson. A question I want to try to get to, and again, while we have a quorum here, there's not a single DFL member here at the committee hearing today. So I'm trying to imagine a question they may want to ask, because I want to make sure that that side is represented. If we were to ask many of your employees, Ms. Stevenson, about this issue that you're having as an administrator, you have to control the finances. Do they see the need and the reasonableness of your asking us today to possibly consider, exempting you from the ESST or possibly the paid family medical? How would they react to this request from you, if I may ask that?
I think that's a great question. Honestly, I was at the Capitol yesterday all day, and my Ed Minnesota Jordan Union president actually was with me all day. Again, a lot of districts have really great partnerships with their staff. I would say Jordan is a really good example of that. I believe that my staff would say they see the impact, they see the unfilled sub positions, they see the challenges that we will be facing this spring. We already know we're probably going to have a significant budget shortfall, which we run very lean. It's going to be challenging to even make recommendations for reductions. We will be looking at larger class sizes. We will be looking at challenges they'll face directly. I think our staff would be far more concerned about that, knowing they already had leave options in place, and would understand.
All right. Stevenson, thank you very much. Members, any further questions? Representative Zalesnikar.
Thank you, Chair Baker, and thank you for your testimony. My question is, do the staff understand that this program may entail a payroll tax for them?
I would say that many don't, despite us sharing that information. Truthfully, I don't know that there has been very much clarity in terms of the impact of recent legislation. I don't think they realize it will be an automatic payroll deduction for them. I don't think that, much like most of our public, I don't think they understand that with historic funding, there were historic educational mandates or opportunities, whichever you'd like to call it, many that were unfunded, had short-term funding. I really truly don't think that our staff have that full understanding despite we continue to message. But I think that it's a larger problem than just our staff. I feel like our communities were told that, and even on the news last evening, schools received record funding, but there's always that piece that's quite important to that narrative where we also have extreme restrictions on the funding that was historic, but also so many new things, pages and pages. I had a document with me yesterday. It's literally 14 pages stapled front to back with all of the new things districts are tasked with putting in place, and we want to do the best that we can. Our staff do too. We are all here for kids and want to have, everybody wants an excellent work environment. It is going to be challenging. And I do not think staff or our public really understand what's happening.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Representative Zalesnikar? Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Stevenson, for your testimony today. So, and thanks for hanging out with us as long as you can if we have any further questions. Moving on to Dr. Schmidt and Ms. Lorenz from Becker Public Schools. Welcome to our committee. Up on deck would be Mr. Caskey from Elk River, so he'll be on deck. So go ahead, folks from Becker. Welcome. Please proceed and introduce yourself, please.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Jeremy Schmidt. I'm the superintendent of Becker Public Schools. Becker Public Schools has approximately 2,900 students and nearly 500 employees. I'm here today obviously with others to share our perspective on the challenges and implications of recent legislation around Employee Safe and Sick Time and Paid Family Medical Leave Act. While these initiatives aim to provide valuable support to employees, the reality is districts like ours, it's far more complex. Over the past 3 years, we've had to expand our HR department, a necessary but costly step to ensure compliance with these and other laws and regulations. This is something many smaller districts do not have the luxury or the ability to be able to do. And working in smaller school districts, I can confidently say that my colleagues would agree with that as well. Managing these requirements without additional resources would be nearly impossible. These programs, though well-intentioned, are effectively unfunded mandates that increase our workload without offering sustainable funding to support them along with the additional administrative burden. One example is the difficulty with negotiations. Since we have already had leave in excess of the required ESST law for many of our groups, it has only led to disagreements at the negotiations table. Unemployment is something that is also not considered as an increase in pay that was recently added in a tremendous financial deficit to our team. In the area of time off at Becker Public Schools and all 5 schools I've been associated with in my time in education, significant leave benefits are already being offered, with many employees accumulating substantial amounts of sick leave over time. In our school handbooks for our students, a student is considered chronically absent if they are excused absent more than 10% of the time, or 17 days in a school year. And we already provide nearly that many days for most of our employees in our school district. This only exacerbates the number of absences that are taken, which creates double the cost for our districts and then some due to the administrative burden. We have difficulty with substitutes, unemployment, and tracking the buckets of paid leave that are available. For our school district, PFMLA would cost about $90,000 per year when calculated at the 0.88% rate. Another difficulty is the implementation periods on these requirements taking place in January. As January 1st implementation is difficult for school districts. Our fiscal year obviously begins on July 1st. This not only impacts our financial planning, but also adds strain to our staffing and our operations. At this time, I'd like to highlight our HR director, Jenny Lorenz, who has been instrumental in navigating these changes for our school. Ms. Lorenz joined us recently, as I mentioned, and has added a position that has been crucial resource to ensuring compliance and managing the impacts of these additional requirements. Without this position, this workload would be unmanageable for the rest of our staff. Together, I hope we can find solutions that balance the needs of employees, and I want to thank you for your time, and then I can I yield my time to?
I'll take care of that for you, Doctor. Thank you very much. But thank you for your testimony. It was very helpful. And Ms. Lenz, welcome to the committee. It sounds like you might have gotten a new job because of this new stuff. So congratulations for that. But we really want to hear from you and what you're seeing the expectations of the school district. So welcome to the committee, Ms. Lorenzen. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. As Dr. Schmidt mentioned, I am the HR Director for Becker Public Schools. And really my hope for today is to provide some personal narratives that reflect the daily struggles we are encountering due to these recent legislative changes. Those who find careers in HR, such as myself, tend to be rule followers by nature. We are trusted and put into these roles to ensure compliance with laws, union contracts, employment practices, while also maintaining fiscal responsibility. These new laws have made it nearly impossible to uphold these expectations and our personal values. While we would agree that the intent of these laws is to improve conditions for workers, the reality is they are in some cases hurting workers, adding to staffing shortages and perpetuating the accountability and absenteeism issues that face our nation today. The failure to account for unique industries such as education have resulted in unsustainable challenges for our schools. This has caused immense stress and confusion because these laws cannot coexist with the negotiated contracts we already have in place. Those of us who work hard to negotiate fair and generous union agreements are being punished by these extremely restrictive laws. Our goal today is to provide insight into the challenges these policies present and perhaps offer some recommendations for improving their implementation. So let's begin with ESST. School districts like ours are already leaders in providing generous paid leave. For context, our teachers have on average 63 accumulated sick days. Over 25% of our teachers have 100 or more accumulated days. On top of that, we have negotiated sick leave banks that offer additional paid sick leave for employees. The challenges with ESST arise in its rigidness and inflexibility of its implementation. Due to contract language that requires us to front load our paid leave and allow for carryover of up to 160 days, we are prohibited from choosing option 1 and 2 of the current ESST rules. We do not have the budget to pay out unpaid leave or ESST leave at the end of each school year. So this leaves us with option 3, which is front loading 80 hours of leave, no matter if you work 3 hours a day or 8 hours a day, if you work 172 days a year or 260 days a year. There is no consideration of various work schedules. So for example, we have several food service workers who work 3 hours per day, 172 days per year. Through their negotiated contract, they are front-loaded 8 sick days at the beginning of each year, which is equivalent to 24 hours. This does not align with the current law requirements of ESST, which is 48 hours or 80 hours. Therefore, we are now expected to give those employees 80 hours of paid leave, which is 26.75 days off in a 172-day work year. That is a 16% absenteeism rate, where, as Dr. Schmidt mentioned, we only allow 10% for our students. This does not align, how is this equitable in our workforce? How can we explain to an employee who works 8 hours per day that yes, the employee next to you who only works 3 hours a day is getting 26 paid days off, but you're only getting 10? Issue number 2 is employees receiving less paid leave due to ESST. For some of our employees, we had to offer them less paid leave because of these regulations. Previous to this law, they were granted 8 days of paid leave front-loaded. However, because this does not meet the requirements and we could not afford the increase to meet those options, we had to move them to the accrual method. For a 4-hour per day employee, they have now lost 10 hours of paid leave. Substitutes. I used to be a substitute teacher. The reason I chose that path was because I had other jobs and commitments and needed the flexibility of where I could choose when I could and could not work. We are now required to provide our daily substitutes with paid leave. The majority of our substitute jobs are submitted the day before to an unexpected illness. We are now having substitutes accept jobs just to turn around and request ESST leave, so therefore we're finding subs for our subs. To make it even more complicated, our union contracts require us to provide paid leave for long-term substitutes, which are anyone who works more than 30 days for the same teacher. So we have now run into the issue of double dipping because we do not have enough manpower to administer this by hand. And our systems that accrue these hours are not catching some of these items. Issue number 4, abuse of the system. This law allows for extreme abuse of public dollars. An employee can start a new job, work one day, receive 80 hours of ESST pay, and never return back to work. For example, this year we had a new hourly employee start on December 2nd. She worked for 1 week and then submitted for bereavement leave and then a medical leave. By law, we are required to provide her 80 hours of pay under ESST, which took her into the month of January. She also received 2 days of holiday pay and 2 months of insurance benefits because our policy says if you have 1 day of paid status in a month, we provide you the full contribution of insurance benefits. This employee received $2,052.20 in wages and $1,876.84 in district paid benefits, a total of $3,929 for 5 days of work. Instead of spending our public funds to better our students, we are being forced to spend it on more staffing just to keep up with these new requirements. All the while, we're already providing more than the law requires. Next, we'll turn to the Paid Family Leave Act. As mentioned, many of our employees have already accumulated significant sick leave banks, averaging 63 days per teacher, which they rely on for extended leave needs. As also mentioned, they have access to sick leave banks. With paid family leave now added to the mix, these employees face uncertainty about the value of that accumulated leave. This overlap creates a dual benefit system that threatens to inflate costs and undermine the agreements painstakingly negotiated with our unions. This dual system of benefits is not only unsustainable, but risks creating confusion and inequity. To mitigate these impacts, we urge the legislator to coordinate the implementation of paid family leave with existing sick leave policies. We need clear guidelines and financial support for districts. It's critical to avoid the chaos of conflicting benefits and to ensure we maintain fiscal responsibility. Some questions we have is, what do we do with these large banks of accumulated leave and these sick leave banks that people have been contributing to? How long will it take employees to receive these paid benefits that are now having to be submitted through the state? Are the employers going to be expected to pay them in the interim and then request to be reimbursed? That answers itself that there will be more staffing needs in the district office. It's also been said that employees can supplement underpayment of paid family leave with their accrued leave. How is that going to be implemented? Who's going to be administering that? We can't take much more, to be honest, those of us in the trenches trying to make sense of this and make sure we're following the rules, because by nature, like I said, we want to do that. But this is honestly making it impossible to do. There are so many questions with very little answers. So, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, our schools are facing mounting challenges under these overlapping laws. While the intentions are admirable, their execution has placed an unsustainable burden on our schools. Without adjustments, we risk destabilizing budgets, worsening staffing shortages, eroding public trust, and diverting vital resources away from education. We ask you to consider exemptions and alternative compliance options for school districts and provide the flexibility needed to align these policies with the realities of our operations. Together, we hope we could craft policies and balance employee needs with the sustainability of public education. Thank you for your time and commitment to Minnesota schools. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Ms. Lorenz, thank you for that very good testimony. And I know our vice chair has our first question up for you today, so buckle up. He's getting a little crazy up here. But my question to you, Ms. Lorenz, is you were talking about the Earn Sick and Safe, and you already had to make some adjustments and some cutbacks to some time off policy. How did that go with the union discussion to do that? You guys work together like a lot of districts around the state. You partner with your unions to provide the best you can. How did that go with having to make those tough challenges to that, Ms. Lorenz?
So the example I provided was for our employees who are not under a bargaining agreement.
Okay.
So our community ed employees who work very hard in our district, keep our community ed programs going, our camp opportunity, which is daycare, they don't really get a say. And so we had to make that decision because of funding, that they are a group that we get to still make that decision.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately, they're the ones that had to suffer.
Thank you.
from this.
Thank you. I know that must have been hard. Representative Mecklen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You put a lot of information in there. And obviously I hear a lot of this at home, you know that. So one of the questions I'm going to ask, because we've had a conversation about this in the last few days amongst ourselves. Why is everybody not just put under an accrual method rather than front loading?
Ms. Lorenz.
Thank you, Representative Mecklen. We are forced to do front loading due to contract negotiated terms. I tried to push through these last negotiations to move to that because of this law upcoming, and I just could not fathom how we were going to make them two overlap, and that did not go well. So we're not looking to remove that language, so those still remain in all of our negotiated contracts, that they must be front loaded.
Representative Mecklen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So basically, the ones that you have put on an accrual method are the ones that are not under contract. They are your hourly, all right. That clears up that part of it. You covered the case of a person literally working a day or a week, and then so basically, as you put it, roughly $4,000 cost to the school for 5 days of work. Would you summarize that into a case of like abuse or fraud?
Ms. Lorenz. Or Mr. Schmidt?
Yes,
Either one.
Yeah, I can answer that. Representative Mecklen, members of the committee. I don't know if this person did that on purpose, but I could see that happening in the future. I was hesitant to have that in our testimony, and I'm sure others have thought of that idea as well. But it is scary to think that somebody could go around to different jobs. It doesn't even have to be in public schools and work for a couple of days, receive some benefits, get some front-loaded ESST time, and request that and ask for their pay.
And because that was remarkable testimony, and I want to say thank you for bringing that forward. I know it's unidentified, but I would like to make sure that we get a copy of that for the record too, just because that was I've heard this around too. It's not just here. So thank you for bringing that forward, Representative Mecklen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm not saying that this particular individual, that was the case, but once it's observed by others, it certainly could paint the picture for an opportunity. And I think right now with the several issues that we have with all the other fraud around here, and it was made very clear in the last couple of years as we were coming into this, and even the previous years when they were pushing this bill through, that we made that argument in committee back then that this would be opening the door for a potential abuse. And they insisted that it would be, if at all, it'd be extremely minimal. And so that I wanted to get that part of it on the record. Several of you have testified now that obviously this is a additional significant cost, and you have to find the money somewhere. In your size school, if you're looking at taking these dollars that Dr. Schmidt, you've mentioned, and Jenny, you've mentioned, what is the potential staff count that you may have to cut, not knowing, I mean, like you said, your fiscal year starts July 1. You can't change midstream after that. So based on the little bit you know now, what is going to hit January 1, you have to predict probably worst case scenario, and then account for that. And you've said you've had to add staff in the district office to all this mandated paperwork. How many teachers are you potentially going to have to contemplate cutting?
Yeah,
Mr. Schmidt.
Sorry, Representative Mecklen, members of the committee, that's a discussion we've begun to have in our district office, but with some of the things, we're kind of playing a waiting game. We saw the governor's budget come out, and we saw some other things, but we've got compensatory in there. We've got this ESST, Paid Family Medical Leave Act, and those types of things. But I anticipate right now, if none of the things that are kind of leaning our way go through, we're looking at probably 6 or 7 teachers, which is considerable for us. And I think we also run pretty lean. We have an operating levy in Becker, but 6 or 7 teachers and probably a handful of other hourly staff, custodians, paras, and those types of staff members. And unfortunately, not unfortunately, I guess, but I love the district office staff, and they work very hard. But those are the positions we're forced to add and not we're not able to remove those because of the requirements and things that we have to follow.
Representative Mecklin?
Well,
Follow-up?
one more. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was mentioned earlier here, I could have asked this before, but historic funding, 2.2 billion, correct?
Correct.
Historic mandates, do you have like a dollar-to-dollar ratio for every additional dollar you got? How much additional dollar value of unfunded mandate you had? So like, was it a 1-for-1? Did you get more mandate than the historic dollar? I mean, do you have any kind of calculation on that?
Dr. Schmidt?
Representative Mecklin, I do not have that off the top of my head, but I will say that the historic funding, some of that came to us in different ways. And, you know, you think of the lunches for students and things like that, where we see a benefit in that for feeding the kids, but we don't see a benefit in that as a school district, I guess, is financially in a way. And so there were things like that come into play. But I know the burden itself, and obviously adding some staff members to make sure we're following through with the requirements and regulations is significant. And it's difficult. We didn't make any money on the historic funding. Let me put it that way.
Thank you. Representative. Final.
Just in conclusion, so I think the general consensus that I've heard from everybody that's testified so far, you're adding administrative staff and you're cutting educators. A lot of what was, you know, likely intended to be a good thing, but it seems kind of concerning. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Mecklin. And again, it doesn't sound like this is benefiting students, is what we're sort of hearing. So, Representative Johnson, and then we'll take Representative Bakebird, and then we'll move on to the next testifier. So, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I'd like to move this beyond a little bit from what we're talking about as far as staffing and dollars and stuff, and bring this back to the kids. I remember when my kids were younger, and I remember when I was younger, that kids attach themselves to the teacher, that they learn their style of learning. They get, you know, hey, this is my teacher. And what I'm hearing is that, you know, with the challenges that we see and the results, you know, we know there's mental health crises in the schools ever since COVID came around. There's score issues. And so I'm just concerned from what I'm hearing, I'd like to get your opinion, is with the more rotational possibility of teachers, or what's happening is those kids that are going in, especially some that are maybe on the spectrum, that are going in and expecting to see the same face every day, are now seeing a different face, and especially at the younger ages when they start kindergarten, you know, through the grade schools. By the time you get to high school, sometimes you don't even care, but, you know, in those younger ages, won't this impact, you know, their one-to-one relationship and the way they've learned to, you know, way they've found out to learn and their emotional level and stuff like that? Thank you.
Who wants to take that one? Dr. Schmidt?
Sure, I can
That's
start on
that's a good question. Yeah.
Representative Johnson, I'd just like to clarify. So you're talking about because of the amount of time off and things?
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the amount of, you know, absenteeism from the teachers now, I'm just wondering, do you see an effect on the kids, especially at the younger ages?
Dr. Schmidt.
Sure. Representative Johnson, members of the committee, I think that kids are very resilient, obviously, and in some flexible in things. I'm sure that that relationship is impacted a little bit. I'd like to hand it off to Jenny. I don't know if she knows the number of days that people take off in our school district or not, but I think that would be something that we will continue to look at with this, is how many days are staff members taking off due to this more flexibility and lengths of time that they're able to take off now. And then that obviously is an impact to our students. And we've been fortunate to have some subs in our district, in Becker at least, where they're very common, so the kids know them as well. They're just like a second teacher in many cases, because they're in the buildings and see each other. But it certainly doesn't improve the relationship between the teacher when they're absent or have the ability to be absent more often.
Ms. Lorenz, do you actually, before I go back to Representative Johnson for follow-up, but Ms. Lorenz, do you track the substitute percentages of their days in and so on?
I usually do at the end. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I usually do at the end of the school year just to see, but I will, to answer your question, Representative Johnson, just recently, as you were indicating before, it has taken some time for daily subs to accumulate these ESST hours, but now they're getting to the point where they are getting up there. And just the other day, I had a principal call me and say, okay, I got a sub to accept a job. Now they're requesting 3 hours of ESST time in the afternoon. So now these students have their normal teacher, a sub, and then another sub in the same day. And sometimes, obviously with staffing shortages, we can't find that third sub. And so now they're being put into other classrooms where the teachers just have to share classrooms. And as you know, there's no learning going on at that point. So as far as them being resilient, yes. But as far as actual learning happening during those days, I would not be able to agree that there's a lot of learning going on when there's that much turnaround and different people being put in front of them. So yes, I just don't know how it's a positive for our students.
Representative Johnson, follow up.
Thank you for that answer. It's just another example of how the challenge, you have the challenges that keep getting put out you. We know we have these issues, and you're trying and start doing your best to solve these issues, only to learn of another challenge that's being thrown back at you. So thank you for everything you do.
All right, Representative Bakeberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. I want to go back to a couple of things Representative Mecklin brought up, and really that dichotomy of, you said you're going to cut or possibly cut 6 to 7 teachers, but you've expanded HR. So one of the things that we often hear is this admin versus teacher. And can you talk about just the impact of that reality in your local school district and in a small town like Becker?
Dr. Schmidt.
Sure. Representative, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'd just like to, if I could go back to Representative Johnson's question too. I should have let her go first. But after her, Jenny speaking, going back to the 3 substitutes in one room at a time, and students do thrive in routine, and so that there is part of that comes into play, and that's obviously not a very good routine that we have when that's happening. Going back to the question from Representative Bakeberg, there is some of that. Last time we made cuts in Becker was my first year there 6 years ago, and as part of that, we did cut one of our assistant principals' positions, a position I thought was valuable, but at the same time, obviously it helps us impact the cuts larger because the amount of money for administrators is higher than most of the teachers. But there is that push and pull with that, and unfortunately, we are unable. We have to add because of the requirements and regulations, and then it turns us against each other many times, and especially in small town. I think even in bigger cities, it's our bigger school districts. We're so top heavy and things like that. But many of the times, it's not because we want to be top heavy. It's because we have requirements and laws and regulations and things like that we have to follow, and so it makes it much more difficult for us.
Representative Bakeberg, any follow-up? All right, and a quick question from Representative Mecklin.
Not so much a question, Mr. Chair. Just for the context of all this, my daughter went to Becker schools from kindergarten through 12th grade. She graduated last year. Dr. Schmidt was the superintendent for the latter half of that, and Jenny works with my better half. And I've heard these stories day in and day out. And I can say that I've had numerous conversations with Jeremy, which I'm going to call you Jeremy in this case because that's what we say when we're on the phone together. And they struggle with this constantly. And then it's like when he talks about cuts or stuff, I watched my daughter go through this 5 years ago. None of this was anywhere, or maybe even 4 years ago, to the extent that it is now. And my better half started working there once our daughter got older because it gave the flexibility to, have the daughter just walk over to the office. So, I have a pretty good insight of what these administrators are going through and what they talk about in the office and the struggles that this has created. So I just wanted that to be clear. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Great testimony, folks, from Becker. Thank you so much. And again, thanks for hanging around if we have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to welcome Mr. Caskey from the Friends up in Elk River. Welcome. On deck would be Ms. Herman, if she could come forward from Prior Lake and Savage Public Schools. And then, so Mr. Caskey, go ahead with your testimony and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Tim Caskey, and I want to thank you for this opportunity. I am the Executive Director of Human Resources with ISD 728. And as the chairman said, we are in Elk River, but we also encompass the cities of, besides Elk River, Otsego, Rogers, and Zimmerman. Put it in different perspective, we have Anoka on one side and St. Michael Albertville on the other, Osseo and Princeton. That's the size of the district. We are the 8th largest district in the state. We have 14,000 plus students and over 2,400 employees. After listening to many of the other testimony here, I'm going to ad lib a little bit, so please forgive me. I first want to thank Ms. Lorenz for her testimony. What she described to you in those situations is not unique to Becker. I think it is safe to say that most of us in the human resources field and school districts are experiencing similar situations. So she did a great job, and I want to thank her for doing that. As it relates to ISD 728 and the ESST law, I want to let you know that we also front load our time. And we do that because it is the simplest way to do it. Unlike some districts, we have not added staff to our HR department. Our district's philosophy is we put the money in the classroom. So we sometimes have to take the easy route to do that. In addition to that, many of our contracts front load time anyhow. So for example, our teachers get their 7.25 days front loaded at the beginning of the year. It just made more sense. Let's just go 80 hours and do it. But what that means is that we also don't have systems to track the different ways in which to do it. Very few of our employees are on the accrual. Mostly our very, very part-time folks are accruing that 1 hour for 30 hours worked. We don't have systems, we don't have staff to do that. So that's why we do our front load. With the new rule where we have to include all of our sick leave, that has become more of an issue for us. We have some teachers that have hundreds of hours of sick leave. We still have roughly just shy of 100 teachers that fall under the old severance programs that were sunsetted back in the early 1990s. I mean, to put it in perspective, we have one teacher who has just taught for her 50th year last year. She has a lot of sick time. And putting that all together, that has potential to increase our absences. The other issue for us is the part-time. So even though our part-timers generally do a 1 for 30 accrual, these are individuals who prior to ESST would work variable schedules. They would choose the days they would work for personal reasons or whatever it might be. And we knew they were going to be at work. Today with the sick leave, they are now put onto more of a schedule, and this happens primarily in our community ed programs, and they will call in sick. We can't get substitutes for those folks, so we end up canceling the program. We had a number of just athletic, young child athletic programs that we had to cancel during the summer because our community ed coach was absent due to illness. Which brings me to, if there's a possibility of changing this, prorating that 80 hours based on an individual's full-time equivalent, whether they're a half-time or a quarter-time person, would be a benefit. At least it would reduce the liability for that. Like other districts, we have seen a cost increase from our vendors. Our transportation costs went up significantly to cover ESST time from our bus company. Our cost to teachers on call, since we use teachers on call for our substitute teachers and paras, they added a 1% increase starting in July of '24 to their contract to cover ESST time for their substitutes. To put that in reference, in 2023, our substitute costs were $2.2 million. So we now add 1% to that, and that will be our estimate as we go into this year. Finally, the attendance issues with the ESST. As many of you have heard from many other districts, the inability to address attendance issues is a problem. Many, if not all, of our collective bargaining agreements have provisions that allow the district to require a medical certification. And generally, that was after we showed a pattern of absences or, the calling in sick on Friday and Mondays, that type of stuff. That is gone by the wayside now. We cannot enforce that because the new law, or the law, simply says that someone can attest to the fact that they were sick. And so we are experiencing absences. We have projected out, based on our absences from the last 2 years, that this year we will see an increase of approximately 300 more absences. And that is only in the areas in which someone can use sick leave time to cover that absence. That doesn't count someone who's on vacation or a teacher that's out of the classroom for professional development or something like that. That is just the sick leave time. That 200 days, when you factor in the cost for teachers on call, is going to be almost $80,000 to us for this year. And finally, the Minnesota paid leave law. There's a lot we don't know about it yet. We understand the rules are still being made related to it. But my ask would be to have a seat at the table. And I say that because I'll give you an example. What we do know about it is there's going to be certain restrictions on employers. One is we have to verify within 7 days that someone is employed with us and would be eligible for leave. That's going to cause a strain on our staff. If we don't verify, our understanding is they get it. In October, and I should preface, every month, the directors of human resources and school districts meet for a meeting every month. We call this our state negotiators meeting. In October, we had the director of the paid leave law come and talk with us to give us an idea as to what we can expect. In that conversation, and it was very helpful to understand where the law is at this point in time, we had a conversation about teachers who are off during the summer and their ability to take leave and be paid for it. And it was our understanding that teacher starts a leave in April and that leave might continue through to July, that they were going to be paid for the time they were not actually in school, June and July. A number of us pointed out that we pay our teachers all year. We pay them on whether it's 24 or X number of pay dates, and their annual salary is spread out through the entire year. The answer we got was, that's not contemplated in the law. And so the possibility of someone being paid twice as a result exists in this law if something like that isn't addressed. And that's why I ask, let us sit at the table and talk about it. A lot of these laws are not designed for school districts, simply because of the way a school district operates. And we'd like an opportunity to at least try to influence that. One of the members asked a question earlier to one of the other folks that testified, and I will give you our number for our cost for the paid leave. This is only for the district's cost, the 0.44%. We are estimating it's going to be slightly higher than $500,000 to us. In our district, the costs of these types of things are rolled into our contracts. So when we cost a contract during negotiations, we account for all the taxes, whether it's FICA, para, TRA. We have some contracts as we head into our negotiation session, which will start in July of '25 here, that are already starting without any increases to salary at an estimated 11 to 12% increase to the contract already because of certain things like this, the unemployment insurance and so on. So with that, I want to thank you for the opportunity on behalf of ISD 728, the administrators, for being permitted to say my piece, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Caskey, for being here today. And again, part of today's session is your voice is heard, and your voice is being recorded, and we are sharing this. You've got an excellent example of why we're going to send a question over to the department to ask that question about possibly double payment. Hadn't thought about that, but they were literally trying to put a one-size-fits-all on every kind of employer, and it just, there's a lot of these exceptions that we've got to dive into. So thank you for bringing that to our attention, and we're going to be looking into that as well. So we'll reach out to that. And just for a couple members, so we had a couple members that had to leave because they had another rules meeting that they had to go to. So we're still operating just like normal, but again, they just wanted to share their regrets that they had to leave. So any questions right now, members? Otherwise, we'll move along. Seeing none. Mr. Caskey, thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hang around if you would like to as well. And Ms. Herman, welcome to the committee. We are very honored to have Prior Lake Savage Public Schools here, and then Mr. John DeGroat could come up as well from the great town of Princeburg, Minnesota, Central Minnesota School. That happens to be my district, so there you go. I want to make sure everybody knows that too, so welcome. And so Emily, go ahead, introduce yourself and please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you so much for inviting us here today. I would like to echo everyone that has presented before me, and an extension of my also gratitude for Becker's presentation. I thought that summed up a lot of what we're experiencing quite well. So I do apologize. A lot of this might be repeat, but I don't do as well as Mr. Caskey at ad-libbing, so I'm going to stick to my script. My name is Emily Herman. I work with Prior Lake Savage Area Schools. I've been in human resources and public school districts for over 10 years. I would say that the last 2 years, from my experience, has been unprecedented in the number of new mandates that are impacting human resources and the complexity of them as we try to navigate through them. So while we acknowledge the importance of ensuring all of our employees have access to sick and safe time, we just need to be candid about the impacts of these new mandates as they impact the education system. Our districts are already stretched very thin. Some of the questions previously on budget cuts in Prior Lake Savage Area Schools, we are cutting up an anticipated $4 million next year, and based off our 5-year forecast, we're anticipating to continually cut at least $4 to $5 million moving forward, for a cumulative impact of over $20 million to our budget over the next 5 years. To give you perspective, $4 million next year is about 3% of our budget, and we're looking at potentially 22.2 FTE and teaching staff that we'll have to be reducing. Similar to Mr. Caskey, we have emphasized keeping our cuts away from the classroom. However, we are finding ourselves at a place in time now that we are no longer to make cuts elsewhere because we have to keep up with all of our compliance, statutory obligated programmings, and so therefore we have to look at our offerings that are impacting our students and our teachers. So with specifically with the new ESST, some of the data that we're finding, last year alone, we had over 6,000 teacher substitute requests. We're seeing between each month, that's 2% to 6% increase in leaves year after year. So when addressing a question that was previously brought forward about the impacts, there is a lot of research out there about the teacher absentee impacts on student achievement, whether that's different research shows different amount of days, but one that sticks out in my mind was one from 2008 that showed absence of more than 10 days equates to a decrease in math scores by 3.3 deviation. We're seeing with that 6,000 absences for the amount of teachers we have, that's an average of 10.5 absences per student contact day. We are looking at an average of 34 to 35 absences in our teachers every student contact day, and on Mondays and Fridays, it's substantially higher than that. So as we're looking at the covering of those costs, it costs us about $240 for each teacher absence to get our substitutes for through Teachers on Call. similar to Mr. Caskey's point, a lot of the direct costs that we're seeing at the building levels are also exacerbated by the cost being handed down to us by our vendors. So we also use teachers on call for our substitutes. They've increased our contract as well by 1%. We are a smaller district than Elk River, but it's still a significant impact to us. So we're seeing this year alone, we're anticipating it's going to be at least an additional $13,000 on our substitute bill. Last year, our substitute bill was $1.2 million, and we're anticipating it to increase based off of the increase in absences. But also, thankfully, we're also seeing that our fill rate is better, which is a great thing. Additionally, our busing company has increased our contract by 6%, which is about $200,000 for us. They are not equating which portion of that is related to ESST costs. They're just saying in generalities their costs increase. But the point of that is just acknowledgement that the costs are being passed down to the districts while we don't have any resources to pass it down to somebody else. So we're having our direct costs and also the indirect costs of our vendors putting that cost down to us. Beyond the financial constraints of the legislation is just the operational realities of how this one-size-fits-all doesn't support the districts. So, and our students. So I'll just reiterate what some others have said about our negotiations process. We have very wonderful negotiation relationships with the vast majority of our employee groups, and we spend hours upon hours every single negotiations period, hearing from them what their concerns and what their desires are, them hearing for us what our realistic abilities to address those, and coming up with some really unique creative solutions that meet the local needs of our community and our students. And with these mandates coming through, it really supersedes that, and it limits our ability to honor those commitments that we've made to each other at the table that fits within the financial abilities of the district. So with the accrual process, one of the requests that we do have is either to remove the limitations of how ESST is accrued or expand offerings, whether that's the proration piece that allows us to prorate based off of individuals' FTE, or just allows us to administer based off of our existing contracts. One thing that I do want to acknowledge is it's my understanding that the building and construction industry did receive some reprieve from some of these requirements because they have longstanding bargaining units, collective bargaining agreements with their employees. I would just ask that maybe that public schools can be considered for those same considerations, because we also have longstanding relationships with a lot of our employee groups. Then moving on to the Paid Family Medical Leave Act, we are anticipating that's going to cost us at least $250,000 in our payroll tax increase. And to the representative's point earlier, that's the same cost that we anticipate our employees are also going to absorb for benefits that we already have existing in our contracts. We already have very robust paid leave paid time off opportunities for our employees. And also we have other benefits like long-term disability in our district. So for example, our teachers' long-term disability kicks in after 30 calendar days. So they have paid time that they can use, their long-term disability kicks in, and then they can use their paid time to supplement for what long-term disability doesn't cover. So we're adding on another layer of this that they are having to pay for and the district's having to pay for benefits that were already covered. So it just adds complexity and cost to a solution that already was found within the collective bargaining units within our district. So in conclusion, while we agree that the intent of ESST and paid family medical leave is commendable, the rigid nature of it and the restrictions of it around it are severely impacting our district's ability to honor our collective bargaining units in a fiscally responsible way that's not impacting our student learning.
Thank you, Ms. Herman. Really good testimony, and I think that question I have for you, and thank you for breaking out the paid family medical leave costs that you're estimating, which would be 50% of the requirement. So the school would actually pay about $250,000. Is that roughly 3 full-time teachers, give or take, just to say roundabout?
Yeah, we average our teachers' cost is about $85,000 with salary and benefits. And Chair, I am not great at math, so I will not be able to do that.
It's very close. 85 times 3 is right around that 250. So.
Chair, I will trust you on that.
Thank you. I will say this, that what I hear most of the time, about 80% of our costs in schools are salaries and people. That's very consistent around the state of Minnesota. Your discussions locally then too with your negotiating partners, again, you really eloquently said that really nicely because again, you've been working on these for years. The community knows what the community needs. If I were sitting and you were sitting next to maybe a member of the union collective bargaining and they heard what you just said, and they are seeing some of the cuts coming because you can't just create new dollars. You can't just raise fees on your own. What would they say to sort of like if they, because again, they're going to be also straddled with $250,000 in payroll taxes to each individual employee of that school district. If they, again, you're not, I don't know what you're going to, I don't know how this is, but do you think that they would like to opt out if it was a guesstimate for you? Do you think they would rather say, look, we don't want to pay the tax because our benefits are pretty decent the way it is? Or do you have a gut on that, or do you have a feeling about that, Ms. Herman?
Chair Baker, members of the community, I do think that they would appreciate that flexibility to have those conversations with their
Right.
members. I think each bargaining unit is very unique in what their benefits that they have accrued over time. But essentially, to Mr. Caskey's point, in negotiations, we have to look at the total cost of a contract. And then we have to figure out what we financially can afford to increase that contract the next year. If our hands are tied on both sides of the negotiations table and what we can even be looking at for the available resources, that limits their ability to talk to their members of what their members' preferences are. So I can't speak to what those preferences would be, but I do feel confident that they would appreciate that opportunity to have those conversations with their members, if they would like to take paid family medical, for this example, or would they prefer to have an increase on their salary so that they can increase their high five for their pension. I think every district and every employee group has their unique preferences and priorities, and that's the beautiful conversations we get to have at those tables, is what are your priorities? Whereas when our packages dwindle and dwindle and dwindle because the priorities get absorbed by mandates, it reduces that ability to have a conversation, and that's where we see a lot of tensions rise and frustrations.
Thank you very much. I think that having that choice is a vital part of what we're doing here today. Thank you. Any member questions? Thank you. Great testimony. Thank you for joining us this morning. Mr. DeGroat, John DeGroat, again, Christian Minnesota, Central Minnesota Christian School. So this is a private school, members, and I wanted to make sure that we kind of heard an impact of what it looks like for you, Mr. DeGroat. So please, welcome to the committee, welcome to St. Paul. Introduce yourself and please proceed.
Thank you, Chair Baker, members of the committee. I do want to say thank you. Driving in on 94 this morning, I have a new appreciation for all of you and your work here. Living 2 hours away, I don't have a commute like that, so this is great. But no, seriously, thank you for your public service and thank you for taking time to hear us today. My name's John DeGroat. I serve as a superintendent at Central Minnesota Christian School, a small private school in Princeburg, as mentioned. And I represent a unique perspective in that a private religious school is not only a school, but we are also part ministry and part small business. I represent one of 460 independent schools in Minnesota, making up nearly 73,000 students. That's around 8% of the state. Thank you for hearing us out on the ESST and the Minnesota Paid Leave Act. Earlier this week, we had a 2-hour late start due to cold weather, and students cheered when I made the announcement. And the staff expressed their gratitude to me throughout the day, because who doesn't love an unexpected break? They get to sleep in, lounge in their pajamas, and enjoy some extra time for rest and play. Minnesotans love a good snow day, and they are delightful. But as I tell my own kids, snow days are awesome, but they aren't always sustainable. If students or even my teachers were in charge of deciding these snow days, we might never return to school, because school is hard and work is hard. And humans are naturally drawn to comfort and ease, for who wouldn't want to capitalize on some incentivized time off? David Dieger in his book 10 to 25 reminds us that young people are not inherently opposed to hard work. Rather, they thrive when their efforts are tied to a sense of purpose, belonging, and meaningful outcomes. And this is an important distinction for us as leaders and policymakers. And instead of reacting to a generation that seems perhaps less willing to work, maybe we need to ask, how can we create environments where the value of work is clear and where a high standard of work is both supported and sustainable? That's the approach I take at my school. And it's this balance between support and sustainability that brings me to the concerns about the unintended consequences of the MPL policy. While the intentions behind these initiatives are admirable, they really are. They aim to provide critical support for Minnesota workers. They also introduce significant challenges for small organizations like ours. Schools like Central Minnesota Christian, they operate with very tight budgets, limited staffing resources, which means that the policies prioritizing rest and leave, though well-meaning, can unintentionally disrupt the delicate balance of our operations. I'd really like to preserve the intent of these policies without the regulations and requirements that may subvert small organizations, and in our case, educational institutions. The financial strain on small institutions at our school, we want to provide a high-quality, Christ-centered education while keeping tuition affordable for families. However, the financial requirements of this policy in particular threatens our ability to maintain that balance. As I understand the bill, premiums paid into the Paid Family Leave Fund, if shared 50-50 by employers and employees hitting a maximum rate, would add up to around $79,000 for our school, and another $79,000 potentially out of employee pockets. That's a significant amount in our already tight budget. And that cost doesn't include the existing cost of hiring subs, as you've heard from all the other schools. Similarly, the administrative overhead, if my HR director was here, she would have been shouting amen from the gallery during Ms. Lorenz's speech. Small schools lack the resources to absorb these burdens without hiring more staff or outsourcing, further increasing costs. Similarly, staffing challenges. We operate with an incredibly lean, dedicated team, and if multiple employees were to take extended leave at the same time, the impact of our operations would be significant. And I can even just attest to the fact that even during the winter seasons when we're experiencing cold and flus, we already struggle with that, and that's in all best intentions. Maintaining high-quality education day-to-day becomes hard when you're trying to create a consistent educational environment for your students, and they're seeing different faces, as was mentioned earlier. As I read the bill, up to 20 weeks, not more than 20 weeks. If you think about that, that's nearly half of a teacher's working year. Forgive my cynicism, and perhaps I don't have all the details correct, but theoretically, a teacher could be home with a family member for 8 paid weeks during the spring semester, have a baby in June with the summer off, and then have the option of starting a 12-week paid maternity leave for bonding in September, giving her 8 paid months at home in a given year and leaving me without a teacher. These substitute shortages are hard anyway, and finding qualified support staff in a rural district like ours is really challenging. Tuition increases. If I have $79,000 to make up in my budget, I've got to raise tuition, and passing these costs to families through higher tuition would make private education less accessible, especially for families already sacrificing to afford it. Over 50% of my families are already on a financial aid plan, and 30% of those, it's substantial. Program cuts. Naturally, as mentioned, we would have to cut programming, let teachers go, and we run pretty lean in our small business model. We have to. As mentioned before, we're one of 460 independent schools, many of which operate very close to a margin of financial viability. And these costs and employment pressures threaten the long-term sustainability of institutions that I think are vital to the fabric of our community. So we respectfully ask you, policymakers, to consider some adjustments that account for the unique challenges faced by our small schools, exemptions, maybe some flexibility, and you've heard some ideas already. Consider exempting small or private schools or allowing them to adopt alternative solutions. Maybe some support for compliance, provide resource grants to assist small schools in managing the administrative requirements of these policies. Small schools like ours are deeply invested in the well-being of our employees and of our families that we serve. I had several families out on, or several teachers out in the last 3 to 4 years on extended leaves, and we took good care of them. We gave them more time than even our policy allowed, and we helped them financially with those incentives. We're not sure that we would have been able to do that if we were forced to stick within some pretty stringent restrictions. But we urge you to consider the unintended consequences and work towards some solutions. Thank you for hearing us today and your time. I offer any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. DeGroat. And again, could you explain to the committee the uniqueness of your school and the partnership we actually have with the state?
Yeah,
Because it's very, very unique.
Thank you, Chair Baker. We are District 815, and there's actually not a public general education school in District 815. And so we are a school, a private school, and there is district funds that go toward public funding, and so they're serve special education students. And they rent space within our building. They have their own school board, they have their own superintendent, they are non-faith-based, but they partner really well with us, and they give us the unique opportunity to work in a public and private partnership, and we think it works really, really well. We do our best to maintain separate identities, but we do a really good job partnering with them, and they serve our students exceptionally.
It's really a cool idea, and thank you for sharing that. Again, I want to make sure that the state kind of hears that there can be some, and I think it's the only one in the state that is doing this right now. I will tell you, locally in our district, this school is just loved so much, and I have spoken at the school. It is so special when you get to go there and you get to pray. You get to, I think it's have chapel day or something on Fridays, and I was able to do that one day, and just the love in that school is really something. And again, all of our schools offer that different kind of support, and this is a special place, and so I just wanted to recognize this very unique school, and thank you for sharing this today. Members, any questions for Mr. DeGroat this morning? Thank you. And John, thanks for coming in this morning too, and appreciate you hanging out today. So members, I have been moved by today's testimony a lot. I know that what we heard today was a lot about flexibility. We heard a lot about we need to be able to adjust accordingly to the real need of substitutions and the urgency that it already was a crisis before a lot of this was coming up. We saw some indications and some confirmations that misusing this is a potential, and it's real, and it's coming, and it's being talked about more, and I think we have to track this, that we have to make sure that the folks that wrote this are shared this information so that we can help them be more flexible in teaching our kids. I don't think what we heard today is really helping our children, because it's going to take money away from the schools, it's going to take money away from teachers, and that is not what we should allow to happen. So I think we should just have some really good conversations as this kind of evolves. I know next week we're going to be having some discussion about our paid family medical leave delay and giving us more time to look at flexibility and how do we start taking that scalpel to this one-size-fits-all mandate for the entire state of Minnesota for every single job creator, every single employee will be paying a tax. We need to make sure that we give this enough time and thoughts and testimony, and to make sure that before this does leave the station, that we get those kind of questions answered, like we heard today. Dee doesn't know would a teacher be paid double in the summer if they were also on paid family medical leave. They could get paid double. We have to get that clarity. So, and we'll have here, I hope someday, the department to ask those kind of questions. We hope that they come in sooner than later, because we are counting down our days, and we don't want to work into June. So we do hope that this starts to develop, and we hope that there's some good things coming. So, members, that's really our work today. It was to listen. I want to thank all the school districts. I want to thank the person online there too. Again, Ms. Evenson. So thank you for being here today as well. That concludes our work today, members. Again, I want to say that on Tuesday is our next meeting, 8:15 a.m. We'll be talking some more about paid family medical leave, one of the initial bill ideas that I just mentioned. So remember, that takes care of our business. We are adjourned.